She showed up at my door with a clipboard, a citation, and one smug smile. Your Labrador violates Regulation 14A. Remove him in 48 hours or face daily fines. That was on April 3rd. But what she didn't know, I'm a forensic auditor, and their books were dirtier than any backyard my dog ever stepped in. My name is Jillian Reyes, I'm 42, and I've spent the last 17 years of my life chasing down financial fraud for a living. I'm a forensic auditor, the person companies call when something doesn't add up. But I never thought I'd need those skills for something as simple and as personal as keeping my dog Rufus safe in his own backyard. Rufus isn't just a pet, he's a rescue, a retired therapy dog, and the only thing that got me through losing my husband 3 years ago. I didn't adopt him for protection, or because he's cute, although he is. I adopted him because he saved me. Every morning, we'd walk the quiet streets of our new neighborhood. Every afternoon, we'd sit on the porch. He made the silence less empty. So when the HOA issued a violation claiming Rufus's breed was non-compliant, I thought it was a mistake. Then came the threats, daily fines, legal notices, and whispered complaints from neighbors I used to chat with. That's when I realized this wasn't just about a dog, it was about control, and they thought I'd roll over. But what they didn't know, I know how to follow paper trails, I know how to read between the numbers, and I never walk away from a lie. Where are you watching from? And have you ever been told you couldn't have something just because someone decided you didn't belong? Stick with me. Because what started as one violation notice about my dog led to an audit the HOA will never forget. After 20 years in high-rise apartments, I was ready for something quieter, something greener. So when I closed on the pale yellow house on Sycamore Lane in late February, it felt like stepping into a chapter I'd almost forgotten how to write. There was a white picket fence, a peach tree in the backyard, and space, finally, for Rufus to run. Rufus is my Labrador. Technically, he's a chocolate lab mix, with some shepherd in him. More importantly, he's my shadow. I adopted him during the hardest year of my life. My husband, Marco, passed away from a sudden heart attack just days before our 12th anniversary. Rufus had been trained as a therapy dog for grief counseling programs. And when I met him, it was as if he already knew the weight I carried. He didn't fix anything. He just stayed. Sometimes, that's enough. We moved into the house on a Tuesday. The first thing I unpacked was his water bowl. The neighborhood seemed perfect. Wide sidewalks, parents pushing strollers, kids on bikes. Neighbors waved when they passed. On the first Saturday, a woman named Karen Whitmore from the HOA board brought over a welcome packet and a small basket of muffins. She smiled, asked about Rufus, and said, "We're so glad to have another responsible homeowner on the block." She was friendly, if a little rehearsed. I didn't think much of it. That first month was bliss. I planted a few herbs. Rufus took to lounging in the sun by the front steps, belly up and unbothered. We had neighbors over for coffee. One even brought a bag of homemade jerky for the dog, not me. We kept to ourselves, but not in an unfriendly way. I was still healing, still settling. Every morning, I'd look out the window and whisper, "We're home, Marco." And it felt true. There were rules, of course. I read the HOA guidelines cover to cover. Nothing outrageous. No fences over 6 feet. Lawns must be maintained. Pets must be registered. Rufus was already licensed with the city and wore his tags. He barked occasionally, but less than the schnauzers next door. And he was never off-leash outside our yard. The garden started coming to life. Daffodils bloomed around the mailbox. I added a raised bed for tomatoes. I painted the front porch swing white. It was all simple, quiet joys I hadn't let myself feel in years. On Sunday mornings, Rufus and I would sit outside with a cup of coffee and a worn-out tennis ball. We'd watch joggers go by. Sometimes I'd read, sometimes we just listened to birdsong and the breeze rustling through the sycamore. I began to remember what stillness felt like. Not the empty kind, but the kind that fills you up again. That neighborhood, that little house, it was starting to feel like a place where I could start over. The other neighbors seemed kind. I met a retired music teacher named Marge, who baked peach cobblers just because. I helped a young couple move a dresser up their front steps. I even joined a book club, though I mostly listened. Everyone knew about Rufus. He had a way of making himself known. One kid started calling him Detective Rufus because of how seriously he sniffed everything on our walks. Another left a drawing of him in our mailbox. I pinned it to the fridge. It wasn't just peaceful, it was healing. Until one Tuesday morning in early April. That was the day I noticed the first change. Rufus was lying in the sun, as he always did, and I caught movement behind the blinds of Karen's upstairs window. A quick flick. Then stillness. At the time, I didn't think anything of it. I assumed she was adjusting curtains, but then it happened again. And again. For several days, I'd see her silhouette at strange hours, standing behind the glass, watching. One morning I waved. She didn't wave back. That weekend, we passed each other while I was walking Rufus. She didn't say hello, just a tight-lipped glance, and a quick step toward her porch. The muffins were clearly a one-time offer. I mentioned it to Tom, a retired postmaster, who lived across the street. He just sighed and said, "Karen gets like that. Don't take it personally." I didn't want to assume anything. People have moods. Maybe she was dealing with something I didn't know about. Still, it was odd. The woman who had greeted me with baked goods was now ducking behind her hedge when I passed. Later that week, I found a flyer in my mailbox. No return address, just bold black text. Reminder, all homeowners must comply with HOA pet policies. Violations will be enforced. I assumed it was a general notice. Maybe even spam. I didn't connect it to her. Not yet, because the truth is, I didn't want to see it. When you've finally found peace, you'll do anything to preserve it, including ignoring the first crack in the glass. But cracks have a way of spreading. It wasn't long after that anonymous flyer that I received the first official notice from the HOA, stamped and signed. April 5th to be exact. It read, "Pet violation, unapproved breed. Your animal does not meet the HOA regulations outlined in section. Remove the pet from the property within 48 hours to avoid fines of $500 per day." I read it 3 times. Section 12 Poor B. I flipped back through the guidelines. That clause didn't exist, not in the version I was given. And unapproved breed. Rufus wasn't a pit bull. He wasn't aggressive. He wasn't even loud. He spent most of his time lying on a blanket chewing his duck toy. I brought the notice to the HOA office that same afternoon. The woman at the desk smiled nervously, looked down at her hands and told me, "You'll need to speak to Karen." Karen Whitmore, HOA board chair, muffin bearer turned silent shadow. And apparently the self-deputized enforcer of fictional rules. I rang her doorbell at 4 p.m. sharp. She opened the door slowly, holding it just wide enough to see one sharp eye and half a frown. "I'd like to talk about this notice," I said calmly, holding it out. She didn't take it, just glanced at it and said, "It's been brought to our attention that your dog violates our community's standards. It's nothing personal. Karen, I've read the HOA bylaws. Section 12 Poor B doesn't exist." Her lips pursed. "You must have an outdated version. I downloaded it from the HOA's own website." She didn't reply, just nodded once, and closed the door without another word. That was when I realized, Karen wasn't confused. She wasn't misinformed. She was inventing rules and expecting me to fold. That weekend, things escalated. I came home from the grocery store to find a bright orange sticker on my door. Final warning, non-compliant pet. Failure to act may result in legal proceeding. The same sticker had been placed on my mailbox, my front gate, and unbelievably on Rufus's doghouse in the backyard. My hands were shaking as I peeled them off. Rufus sat at my feet, confused, tail wagging softly. He didn't understand. But I did. Someone wanted us gone. The next morning, 2 neighbors who had previously smiled and waved now crossed the street to avoid me. One woman looked down at her phone as I passed. A man I'd spoken to just last week mumbled something under his breath when Rufus barked once at a squirrel. I wasn't imagining it. The air had changed. I wrote a formal letter to the HOA, contesting the violation. I attached Rufus's city license, vaccination records, a behavioral report, and even a note from his previous handler verifying his training history. I sent it certified mail and saved the receipt. 5 days passed, no reply. Instead, a new notice appeared, this one accusing me of yard neglect and overgrown vegetation. My grass had been trimmed 2 days earlier. The raised garden bed was tidy. There wasn't a weed in sight. It was a pattern death by paperwork, small bureaucratic stabs meant to destabilize. I began documenting everything. Photos, timestamps, scanned letters, video recordings. I bought motion-activated cameras for the front gate and the garage. If they wanted to play games, fine. But I wasn't going to be caught off guard again. That week, I received 3 more notices. Viewers, unpermitted alterations for replacing a porch light. The porch light. Obstructed pathway for a potted plant that sat 2 feet from the edge of the walkway. I wasn't just being watched, I was being targeted. But the moment that truly changed everything came late one night. I was closing the living room blinds when I saw her. Karen. Standing in my driveway, just standing motionless, staring at the house. Arms crossed, no phone, no clipboard, no expression. She left nothing behind, no new notice, no pamphlet. Just turned and walked away. That was when the fear turned to fury. Because this wasn't about a dog. It wasn't about a lawn, it was about control. Karen, sweet, buttoned-up Karen, was using the HOA as her weapon of choice, and I was just her latest target. I began talking to other neighbors quietly. Some shrugged it off. Others gave careful nods and phrases like, "It's better not to push back." But one woman, Lana, from 2 doors down whispered. She did the same thing to the Johnson. They moved out in 8 months. Moved out. That was the goal, wasn't it? But I had news for Karen. I wasn't going anywhere. What she didn't know was that I wasn't just someone with a mortgage and I was someone who had spent 17 years auditing fraudulent nonprofits, embezzling school boards, and local governments with creative ledgers. I knew how to read budgets, I knew how to follow numbers, and I had just requested 3 years' worth of HOA financial disclosures, which by law they were obligated to provide. She'd picked the wrong dog owner, and she had no idea what was coming. The request for financial records was like flipping on a light switch in a dark room, except the roaches didn't scatter. They got louder. Within 2 days of filing the formal demand for HOA disclosures, I received a notice that my front porch contained non-regulation furniture, the offending item. A vintage wooden rocking chair I'd picked up at a yard sale. It had sat quietly beside my potted ferns for over a month with no complaints. Then came the landscaping violation again, followed by a vehicle sightline hazard warning because I'd parked my car 2 inches over the edge of the curb. This wasn't enforcement, it was harassment. On April 15th, I received my 5th violation in 10 days. Rufus stopped lying out front. I stopped leaving the blinds open. Each envelope felt like a landmine. The neighborhood that had once felt like home now stared at me with squinted eyes and hushed voices. A neighbor I'd helped carry groceries walked right past me in silence. Even Tom, the one who once chuckled about Karen's uptightness, had gone quiet. People were scared, or worse, complicit. I called the city to report the pattern. They sympathized but said, "We don't regulate HOAs." They recommended mediation. I didn't want mediation. I wanted truth. So I started digging. First, the annual budget. Then the invoices, then the board meeting minutes. They were late to deliver them, claiming technical issues, but by April 21st, I had 3 years of records in hand. That night, I made a pot of coffee, turned on every light in the living room, and sat down with a red pen. What I found: duplicated vendor payments. Checks signed by Karen to a landscaping company contracted by the board, which just happened to be owned by her cousin. A $3,800 security review paid to a firm with no website, no phone number, no listed. The memo line just said, "Property assessment." multiple payments to a consultant with no 199s or contracts, HOA reimbursements for purchases at expensive garden centers with no documentation of which property they were for. It was a shell game, money moving in circles, meetings not properly recorded, votes passed without quorum, signatures that looked suspiciously alike. I'd seen this kind of thing before. The difference was, this time it was personal. The next day, I drafted a complaint with full documentation. I sent it to the county's Consumer Affairs Division, the state's HOA Oversight Board, and because I believe in covering every angle, to a local investigative journalist who specialized in homeowner abuse. Karen must have found out, because that's when the letters started. 3 in a week, all anonymous. 1 typed, 2 handwritten, none signed. The first accused me of trying to destroy the community. The second warned, if you love your dog, you'll stop. The third was short, people disappear for less. I won't lie, that one rattled me. I called my sister in Santa Barbara. I called my lawyer. I bought a second motion camera. I kept the lights on longer at night. But I didn't stop. Instead, I went deeper. I pulled property tax records and HOA board member declaration. I found out Karen never disclosed her family connection to the landscaping contractor, a direct violation of the ethics clause in the HOA charter. If this were a publicly funded board, she could be facing criminal charges already. By now, I was logging every move in a spreadsheet. Date and time of notices, vehicle descriptions parked near my home, late at night. Anonymous emails. Desucking. Phone hang-ups from blocked numbers. I even flagged suspicious board meeting votes that had no attendance sheets. It was all being backed up to a secure drive. Then a break came. Daniel, the friendlier board member, dropped off a flash drive at my door. No note. Just the drive in a blank envelope. Inside, unedited recordings from recent board meeting. At one meeting, Karen can be heard saying, if she doesn't want to follow rules, maybe we make things a little less comfortable for her. Another board member replied, worked for the last guy. The last guy. Apparently I wasn't the first one targeted. Just the first to fight back. Then the final piece clicked into place. While scanning a payment log for lot maintenance, I noticed a strange parcel ID number that didn't match any address in the neighborhood. Curious, I cross-checked it with the county assessor's office. It led to an empty lot. One the HOA had purchased 2 years ago, then quietly sold to a developer for a substantial profit. The buyer, a shell company tied to Karen's family trust. It wasn't just about bullying homeowners. This was about pushing them out so the board could quietly flip properties at a profit, then disguise the transactions as neighborhood improvements and lot redistribution. Rufus wasn't the issue. I was. I had bought a house she wanted off the market. This wasn't just petty, it was organized. It was fraud. And it was almost time to show everyone what she'd really been doing, while hiding behind HOA bylaws and fake fines. I didn't sleep much that night. The realization that Rufus and I had been collateral damage in a long game of HOA fraud was both terrifying and clarifying. Terrifying, because it meant Karen wasn't just petty, she was calculated. Clarifying, because now I had something better than suspicion. I had evidence, patterns, motive, paper trails, audio. By sunrise I had a plan. Step 1, legal firepower. I called attorney Lisa Merriman, a former colleague from a joint forensic case against a mismanaged nonprofit in Sacramento. Lisa had once unraveled a city budget and found a missing $1.2 million in housing credits. She was fierce, smart, and owed me a favor. She agreed to take my case pro bono. I hate HOA corruption, she said. And besides, you were the best forensic bulldog I ever worked with. We filed an emergency petition to review all HOA election results, vendor agreements, and expenditure approvals dating back 3 fiscal years. Step 2, media spotlight. Next, I reached out to B. Tran, an investigative journalist with Channel 9, known for breaking the Valley Ranch School Board embezzlement story. I sent her a curated package, audio clips from board meetings, annotated transaction records, and anonymized homeowner complaints. I left out names for now. Her reply came in under an hour, This smells like racketeering under the umbrella of community management. Let's talk. Step 3. Leverage the law. Lisa walked me through the process of initiating a civil discovery freeze, which meant Karen and the HOA board were now legally obligated to preserve every financial record, email thread, and vote count. Tampering now meant obstruction of justice. This wasn't a neighborly feud anymore. It was a legal operation. Karen must have sensed it. Because just like that, everything stopped. No more notices. No more code citations. No more anonymous flyers or sideways glances. The silence was deafening, the kind of quiet that made your skin crawl because you know it's not peace. It's the stillness before something big breaks. But this time, I wasn't the one breaking. With Lisa's help, I drafted a whistleblower statement addressed to every homeowner in our community. It didn't name Karen or accuse anyone directly. It simply stated the facts. Payment irregularities, unapproved vendor contracts, conflict of interest violations, procedural manipulation of votes, evidence of property flipping for personal gain. We printed 94 sealed envelopes, one for each household. On April 30th, Rufus and I walked the neighborhood like it was any other day, placing a single letter in every mailbox. I didn't knock. I didn't linger. I let the truth do its work. 2 days later, the knock came to me. It was Marge, the retired music teacher, who once brought over a cobbler. I always thought something was off, she said quietly. The landscaping budget jumped $12,000 last spring, and no one could explain why. Then came Lana, the young mom who'd once brought jerky for Rufus. I was fined for a missing fence post, 2 days after I voted against Karen's fundraiser. The stories kept coming, and suddenly, I wasn't alone. We started gathering in my garage, me, Marge, Lana, Daniel, the board member who leaked the flash drive, and 2 other residents with a background in municipal finance and civil codes. We called ourselves the Sycamore. We compiled everything into a shared digital folder. HOA documents, screenshots. Daniel provided email threads, showing that Karen often edited the minutes herself before posting them publicly. I color-coded our evidence like I was preparing for a federal deposition. In a way I was. Meanwhile, B. Tran scheduled an on-site interview for me. She brought a full crew, asked to film Rufus, and interviewed 3 members of the Sycamore 6, anonymously. She told me she was working on a 3-part segment called The Hidden Costs of HOA Power. I gave her the receipts. All of them. Then came the news that changed everything. The County HOA Compliance Board had approved a public hearing, scheduled for May 12th at the Civic Administration Hall. It would be open to residents, recorded and governed by transparency regulations. Which meant one very important thing: Karen would have to answer questions. Under oath, in public. The next 2 weeks felt like building a courtroom in my living room. I compiled data, cross-referenced invoices, and prepared binders, yes, plural. I made sure every dollar in and out of our HOA had a paper trail, and when it didn't, I made sure that absence was obvious. At night, Rufus would curl up beside me, blissfully unaware. He didn't know that he had become the reason an entire fraudulent ecosystem was about to unravel. I kept a single post-it note on the wall behind my desk. She picked the wrong dog. By the time May 11th rolled around, we were ready. And I hadn't received a single violation since the audit freeze. Funny how silence can mean surrender when you hold the right kind of power. The hearing was scheduled for May 12th at 10 a.m. Held in a modest municipal building with flickering fluorescent lights and the faint smell of overwaxed linoleum. I wore navy slacks, a crisp white shirt, and a quiet kind of resolve. Lisa sat beside me, with a leather briefcase, and that sharp smile that always meant, "They're not ready." The room was filled. Homeowners, HOA board members, city officials, and yes, a camera crew from Channel 9. Even Rufus was there, tucked quietly beneath my seat, with his therapy dog vest on, a calm, steady presence that reminded me exactly why we were doing this. Karen entered last. Late. Flustered. Dressed for a brunch, not a hearing, she avoided eye contact with everyone, even the board. The proceedings began with the usual formalities: names, affiliations, scope of review, but by 10:17 a.m., the room had shifted. You could feel it. Lisa stood and opened the binder labeled Conflict Disclosure Violations, HOA Sycamore, no fire, no dramatics. Just fact after fact. Vendor payments with matching routing numbers and different recipient names, 200 community security improvement, routed to a non-existent firm, linked to a P.O. box, owned by Karen's brother-in-law. Then she handed over the board voting irregularity summary, meeting minutes altered without vote approval. Votes passed with 2 signatures when a quorum required 5. Every entry was backed by evidence. She was an artist, and the canvas was corruption. Then it was my turn. I kept it measured, calm, precise. I walked through the escalating violations, starting with the fake dog complaint, ending with the anonymous threats. I showed the timeline. I submitted the anonymous letters. And then I played the audio. Karen's voice rang across the speakers. If she doesn't want to follow rules, maybe we make things a little less comfortable for her. You could feel the temperature drop. Then Daniel stepped forward. He testified that meetings were often staged, that discussions were held over text to avoid records, that budgets were padded and dissenters pushed off committees. He held up his own resignation letter, dated months ago, but never accepted or recorded. This board doesn't serve the neighborhood, he said. It serves itself. Then came public comment, and that's when it shifted from audit to reckoning. Marge stood first, her cane trembling slightly as she read from a sheet of loose leaf. I paid a $300 fine for not having my garden hose rolled up. The same week, Karen's niece held a party that shut down half the street. Lana spoke next. I begged the board to reconsider the shed violation. I even cried at the meeting. They told me I was being too emotional. I lost sleep over that fine. And now I know, it wasn't about a shed. Others followed. One man said he'd been fined for a patio umbrella that matched his house until he realized it blocked Karen's view. A couple said they'd applied 3 times to build a small ramp for their disabled son, denied every time. A new homeowner, in tears, said she was ready to sell until she saw our flyer and realized she wasn't alone. By 11:35 a.m., the board was visibly unraveling. Karen tried to interject. I think this is becoming personal. But the committee chair raised a hand. Ms. Whitmore, you will have your opportunity after testimony is complete. And that moment? That was the real turning point. The silence that had shielded her for so long had cracked. Then broken. And now, it echoed. At 12:10 p.m., the chair moved for immediate action. This board is to be placed under formal review. A third-party forensic audit is ordered. Discretionary spending froze. Board leadership, including Ms. Whitmore, suspended pending outcome. There was no applause. Not yet. Lisa leaned over and whispered, "That's game." Outside, the Channel 9 van was parked diagonally on the curb. B-Tran waved me over and held out a mic. I gave a short statement. This was never about revenge. It was about accountability. We're not here to tear down our neighborhood. We're here to protect it from people who think power is a shield against responsibility. That night, Channel 9 aired the first of a 3-part series, Inside the Gate. When HOAs turn hostile, Rufus made it into all 3 episodes. In one, he yawned in the background while I flipped through documents. The internet loved him. 2 days later, Karen resigned. No apology, no explanation. Just a short post in the HOA newsletter. Effective immediately, I will step down for personal reasons. Good. Let her go. We didn't want revenge. We wanted structure. At the next HOA meeting, the Sycamore Six took center table. We proposed 3 reforms. Term limits for board members, a few cried. And for the first time, the HOA boardroom didn't feel like a courtroom. It felt like a neighborhood. It's been 3 months since the hearing, and for the first time in a long time, I wake up without checking the mailbox in dread. Rufus still stretches out across the porch every morning, his nose tilted toward the breeze. No citations, no orange stickers, just the smell of rosemary, the low hum of bees, and the soft whir of a peaceful neighborhood getting back to itself. Karen is gone. Quietly. Completely. She moved out of her Sycamore Lane home in early June. No farewell letter. No last-minute defense. The house sold in less than 2 weeks, through a broker with no listing photos and an LLC buyer. It's like she vanished between lines of a spreadsheet. Her name doesn't come up much anymore, and when it does, it's in that hush people use for natural disasters that came and went. But we remember, because what she tried to control ultimately gave us back something we didn't realize we'd lost. each other. The final audit report from the county revealed $73,420 in undocumented or misappropriated expenditures over a 4-year period. The HOA was fined. The board was required to undergo ethics and finance training. A third-party fiduciary now oversees all budget approvals and community spending. We printed a copy of the audit and posted it on the community bulletin board under a laminated banner that reads "Transparency lives here now." The Sycamore 6 grew into a standing committee of 12, open to all residents. We hold monthly meetings at the community rec hall, transparent, recorded. Anyone can speak, even if it's just to ask why the dog park doesn't have shade. We're working on it. Marge's nephew builds pergolas. We rewrote the HOA bylaws line by line. Term limits are now standard. Special assessments require 2/3 homeowner approval. All violation reports must be signed and publicly recorded. No more anonymous complaints. No more secrets. But the part I'm proudest of, we added a new clause: no action shall be taken against any homeowner based on the breed, size, or assumed temperament of a licensed and registered domestic pet. We call it Rufus's Rule. It passed unanimously. Last week, the city sent us a commendation for exemplary community governance reform. It's framed in the rec center next to a photo from the first New Neighbors Welcome BBQ. Kids in lawn chairs. Dogs on leashes. Marge in her sun hat. Me holding a clipboard, laughing like someone who forgot she used to be scared. It's strange how something so small, a notice taped to a door, a dog lying in the sun, can ripple outward and remake an entire street. But that's what happened. I still audit part-time, still freelance for a few firms. But I also started something new, Homeowner Right. It's a free workshop I host twice a month. Open to anyone from any neighborhood. The first session drew 12 people. The third, over 40, someone drove in from 2 towns over just to say, I didn't even know I could ask to see my HOA's books. Now they know. They all do. We end every session with a laminated handout. Not just on your rights, but how to organize, how to document, how to request records, and how to recognize when a friendly face is hiding a power grab. You don't need to be loud, you just need to be thorough. A few days ago, Rufus turned 9. We had a party. Yes, with balloons. Yes, with cupcakes. Half the neighborhood showed up. Someone brought a kiddie pool full of tennis balls. Someone else hung a hand-painted banner from the sycamore tree. Betty laid her 500th egg, and Rufus laid down the law. It made me laugh. It made me cry. It made me feel because they remembered. Because it mattered. Because in the middle of all the pettiness, fear, and silence, we built something we didn't expect. A real community. One built not on obedience but on fairness. Not on silence but on voice. Not on rules but on rights. Sometimes when I sit on the porch and sip my coffee, I see new neighbors walking their dogs past my house. They wave, I wave back. The air feels easy again. And he rolls onto his back and basks in the morning sun, just like he always did, unbothered, beloved, and finally free. Sometimes people ask me if I'll ever leave, if I'd ever sell. I just smile and shake my head. Why would I? We fought for this place. And we won. Every morning I whisper it again like I used to. We're home, Marco. Only now I believe it with every beat of my heart. If this story made you think of your neighborhood, your porch, your peace, you're not alone. HOAs were meant to protect communities, not control them. And sometimes, the rules aren't the problem. It's the people who twist them. Have you ever had to fight back against petty power? Drop your city in the comments and tell us your HOA horror story. And hey, if your dog's ever been braver than your board, we want to hear that too. Because every voice matters. And sometimes the quietest ones bark the loudest. Subscribe for more real stories from real homeowners who said enough. And turn on notifications, because the next HOA showdown might be closer than you think.